We are at OneClimate.net at Copenhagen for the Climate Change Conference, the greatest show on earth, as it was called. The chair next to me is empty because we're hoping to get Barry Coates from Oxfam to talk to us, but he's locked up in a caucus in a meeting because there have been a number of rather exciting events today, one of them to do with the small island developing states, which Jeffrey Allen was talking about a few minutes ago. And now the European countries meeting in Brussels have announced some financial figures. And one of the things missing from this conference is figures. And here is Barry Coates from Oxfam just turning up. So, in fact, he's going to come and sit next to me. Is he going to sit next to me here? No, on the right. That's great. And instead of telling you about the figures, I'm going to ask Barry the first question. Hi, Barry.
Hi, Jeff.
I expect you've come from a meeting because there seem to be a lot of events going on today. I was just about to fill a couple of minutes by going on about the European Union financial announcement, which is some money on the table, or an offer of money on the table. I don't know if you've seen this or you're prepared to talk about it, but they've announced some figures, 2.4 billion euros a year for 2010 to 2012 to help developing countries tackle climate change. I haven't seen Oxfam's response, but I know that ActionAid, which I've got... Oh, no, I do have Oxfam's response just here, but so I won't even have to read it. Let me ask you. It's very hard for an outsider to know what these figures mean. It sounds like a lot of money. It's all in billions. What's the response to the European Union offer here at Copenhagen?
You know, it's useful to have funding actually announced in terms of amounts, because there's so many people who are just retreating behind vague figures. But unfortunately, the European figures really aren't good enough. And from one respect, they're a recycling of aid money. I mean, there is not a commitment that these funds shall be clearly additional, not only to existing aid levels, but also the programmed in aid levels, commitments to 0.7% of gross national income, which is what all countries are meant to provide to aid. So, you know, if you're giving money to climate to help countries adapt to climate change, it shouldn't be taking away from aid budget. It's essentially like taking money away from poor people and using it to repair damage caused by the rich. You know, it's a wrong principle. And the other thing is, you know, if you look at the scale of funding that's required, you know, any credible studies are coming up with figures of about $100 billion a year. So while this kind of down payment sounds like a lot of money, then it's really a tiny pittance compared to what's required towards $100 billion a year. And what's more, there's support for mitigation in developing countries to come up on top of that. So, you know, Oxfam's figures that we need about $200 billion a year. The EU's working off a proposal of around $10 billion a year for the first 3 years into a startup fund. You know, while again, that's kind of, yes, I guess you could say that's a startup fund, we would say it's not adequate to the kind of scale of problems countries are already facing under climate change.
So just to be clear about this meeting is getting very complicated. Yeah. If we take them at face value, this amount of money that they've announced, which is whatever it is, I'm trying to read it, 35 billion euros every year from 2000. Oh, that's long term. For the moment, they've announced figures for 2010 to 2012, just to get the show, keep it going until the big money, we hope, comes in.
Yeah.
But are you saying even that's not enough in terms of sort of start-up finance over this 3-year sort of interim period?
No, I mean, this whole idea of start-up finance is kind of predicated on what countries are saying is possible, not predicated on the need. You know, kind of if you look at what the need is for funding, that countries are having to pay huge amounts. I mean, if you look at what the developed countries themselves are spending on protecting themselves against climate change, it's orders of magnitude higher than everything that's provided to every single developing country. I mean, we kind of did some figures to say that one state in Germany is spending more money on climate change than the whole amount of climate change that have been provided to the whole developing world. So, there's a real mismatch, and it's also a mismatch when you talk about $200 billion a year. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money. But as the saying goes, if the climate was a bank, it would have been bailed out by now. We've just spent $8.4 trillion on bailing out banks and the financial crisis. So when we want to, as an international community, we can find money.
Okay, well, I know that you've been in the development business for many, many years, not just in New Zealand. I missed the introduction. You're director of Oxfam New Zealand, but you were in Britain and you've been doing this a long time. So I want to ask you this question that you've raised about the money and aid, because there seems to be one of the critical things in this conference is that the money that's pledged for climate change is supposed to be new and additional, over and above official aid or development assistance money. So, and this is maybe an example of, we're not quite clear where this money is coming from, pledged by the EU. So what is Oxfam's position on this? Is it happy with what the industrialized countries have said about new and additional money? Do you believe it?
No, because, in the past, at G8 summits and other occasions, countries have promised more aid for this or that. And invariably, you start to take away the sort of rhetoric behind it. And money gets announced 3-4 times, the same piece of money. So we really need some clarity out of this. And we need some legal obligations. So what Oxfam's calling for is not just that there be promises of money, but that countries actually commit to it. And they make a commitment. We will provide this amount of funding for specific periods of time. And that's a kind of predictability and specificity that you're going to need. So in order to do that, you're not going to rely on treasuries and ministers of finance to be able to say, oh, this year, oh, yes, that's right, we've got to allocate this amount of money. What we need is some mechanisms for finance, some things like the currency taxes that have been talked about, or Oxfam's talked about auctioning off the polluter permits underneath this climate deal. So under the climate regime, countries get essentially a permit to pollute. So an auctioning of a small number of those permits to pollute could generate enough money to pay for the bills that are required for adaptation, for example. Or, there are other methods such as taxes on aviation and maritime fuels that aren't taxed at the moment. So, there are lots of things that could be done, but what you need is it has to be predictable. It shouldn't be part of an annual budget round. It should be clearly additional, not only additional to existing aid levels, but actually additional to aid commitments, additional to the 0.7 commitments that governments have signed up to. And, the danger is what governments are going to say is, oh yes, we'll give $20 billion more in aid. Then they'll turn around and next year they'll slash the aid budget. And so unless you have that separation of the aid funds and the climate funds that are clearly separate, there's always going to be the potential for countries to essentially try and get away with substituting one for the other.